Hi, welcome back to Digital Defense, the weekly cybersecurity show broadcasting to you live from the Bloomberg News Washington, D.C. Bureau. I'm your host, Jordan Robertson, a cybersecurity reporter here with Bloomberg in Washington. This week, I want to talk to you about a subject that's near and dear to our hearts. It was a Senate Intelligence Committee investigation, Senate Intelligence Committee hearing that was held yesterday on Capitol Hill regarding Russian election hacking. And this hearing was in response, it appears largely due to a story that we published last week regarding the fact that the same Russian hackers who leaked DNC emails, who leaked Hillary Clinton campaign emails, also targeted as many as 39 states. Now, regular viewers of the show will remember that we've discussed this. We discussed this on last week's show, and it's obviously very gratifying and encouraging to see that the Senate Intelligence Committee has taken an interest in the reporting and is trying to get to the bottom of some of these facts. So I want to walk you through today what we know, what we learned about this investigation through the committee hearing yesterday, and also what was left out of this hearing that I think you should know, which in many ways is even more important. So I'll walk you through what we know, and again, what I think you should know, excuse me, that was left out of the hearing. And as always, Digital Defense is an audience-driven show, so I want you to send in any comments or questions you have, and we'll be able to answer as many of those as possible live. We're broadcasting on Facebook, Periscope, Bloomberg.com, and the terminal, so wherever you're watching, if you want to leave your questions or comments in the comments section, we will be able to see those, and we're going to answer as many of those as we can. So let's just dive right in. Again, yesterday, the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is investigating one of the many investigative bodies looking into the 2016 U.S. presidential election and the possibility that Russia tampered with the election, picked up on a story that we wrote again last week on the idea that as many as 39 states were targeted by Russian hackers in the election. And some interesting results from the hearing. I think the biggest one, the biggest takeaway is that many of the Congresspeople, many of the senators were pushing for the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, and I'll show you the witnesses. The witnesses here. The folks that you're viewing here are the two individuals on the left are from Department of Homeland Security. The guy on the right is from the FBI. These were the main witnesses. One of the main purposes of this hearing appeared to be senators calling for the release of all the information or the declassification of all the information about attacks on U.S. electoral systems, especially the names of the states and the state entities that were targeted by these Russian hackers. The big takeaway for this audience should be that we didn't get that. These agencies were not willing to even discuss in that setting which states were targeted. They did provide a number, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. And we left the hearing not knowing a terribly big amount more about which states specifically were targeted and how. DHS claimed and said that because that information is confidential between states and the federal government, that they cannot release the data, but that senators would be urging states to come forward. As you can imagine, there are not going to be a lot of states that are going to be willing to come forward and say, hey, not only were we attacked, but data was stolen. So that was a bit of a letdown, perhaps not a surprise, but a letdown. We did have testimony yesterday from the Illinois State Election Commission, which, again, as regular viewers of this show will know, I give Illinois a lot of credit for being the real tip of the spear when it comes to this investigation. They alerted the FBI. They found the breach themselves. They alerted the FBI. The FBI came in, realized, oh my goodness, we've got a big problem, and then they started detecting identical attacks on other states. So Illinois deserves a lot of credit. I would not expect most states to follow their lead. As I mentioned, again, audience-driven show, please feel free to send in any questions or comments. We're going to get to a lot of those. The one thing I did want to talk about was the number. As reporters, we're always keenly aware of what public officials say about our stories. And in this case, yesterday, DHS and the FBI acknowledged that they saw attacks on 21 states' election-related infrastructure, as they called it. They didn't get more specific than that. So, of course, our story reported at least 39 states. So one of the key takeaways that I want any viewers of the show to have is that that number, 21, is not a complete number. There's a lot that's left out of it, some really significant types of attacks, and DHS, frankly, has refused or declined to clarify much further for us what exactly they meant by election-related infrastructure included in that 21. So for most people, it's neither here nor there. But the big point is when you're watching these hearings, you need to be very, very careful of how things are phrased. These statements by these individuals were undoubtedly heavily lawyered and heavily vetted before they went in front of the committee. And that's not to suggest that they were lying. Of course not. But what I am suggesting is that when you hear a number like that, 21, and 21 states targeted, obviously on its own, that's a really big deal. That's a big problem and a big admission by the government that warrants further investigation. If you're trying to square that number with the one that we published earlier, 21, which is completely valid and is what we were doing here as well, try to give you a behind-the-scenes look at what our jobs look like, it's really important to note that that number 21 leaves out a lot of things that we included. And one of the really important things that we included in our calculations were attacks not just on voter registration databases, which I've talked about on this show, are really the main thing we need to worry about, in my estimation, when we think about tampering with elections, but also campaign finance databases. Remember, these Russian hackers were not just interested in potentially manipulating voter registration and how people vote, but they were trying to gather as much information as possible about how the system works. And a key part of that is understanding who gives money to whom. And these disclosures to the state, while on their own may not be that valuable if you steal them, again, the problem with this hacking is that what if you could manipulate that data? If you could manipulate information about who's giving money to whom, you could potentially take out a candidate or their donors with one well-crafted leak. I recall the case in California where a CEO of a major tech company was outed in some fashion as being supportive of an anti-gay marriage amendment in California, an anti-gay marriage proposition in California. And he caught a lot of blowback. That was a very unpopular position, but his donation of either time or effort or resources to this campaign really cost him a lot, and he was eventually out of the job. So this idea of outing people based on who they support for elections, and especially manipulating that information, either causes that they identify with, the amount of money they've given, all of this is considered election infrastructure, and it doesn't appear DHS was including that in their calculations. But again, they have not clarified for us what exactly they meant. So if there's an update, I'll certainly share that with everybody here. So again, any questions? Please feel free to write in. We're getting a bunch of good ones here, so I'm going to start to answer some of these. The first one here is, why is it taking so long for these revelations to come out? Why wasn't the government honest from the start that there may have been a hack? Your question, thank you for these questions. Your question is getting really to the heart of the matter, which is that we've all been so consumed by the chaos engulfing this White House when it comes to the Russia investigations that I think a lot of people, ourselves and the news media included, kind of lost sight of the real election hacking that was occurring, and the election hacking that was occurring that really captivated the Obama White House, and that they were mainly focused on these attacks that we've talked about on this show. So I think the reason it hasn't come out was, as we learned yesterday in the hearing, and as we reported, the Obama administration was very concerned about seeming to put the thumb on the scale of this election, to appear that they were involved in tampering with the electoral process in some way by releasing this information. And the view from within the White House that we've been able to glean was that the White House believed the same polls that many Americans did, which was Hillary Clinton, and apparently Donald Trump did as well, that Hillary Clinton was projected to be the winner. And to appear to tamper with that process by releasing information was something the president did not want to do. So as a result of that, this information about the 39 states being targeted, it just didn't come out because it wasn't seen as particularly helpful in that moment. Hindsight being what it is, it obviously would have been very valuable information to come out earlier, but that's an apparent oversight that will be associated with this presidency. Next question here is, how can I find out if my state was hacked? Another interesting question, because yesterday, again, these individuals, DHS and FBI, told the Senate Intelligence Committee that any state that was hacked, that was successfully compromised, knows about it. Okay, fair enough. That means the government and or the state detected the attack, and if it was the federal government that discovered the breach, that means, according to these statements yesterday, they've alerted the states to those successful hacks. Problem with that is nobody's disclosed any breaches beyond the ones we know about. We know Arizona was breached by these hackers. We know Illinois, again, was breached by these hackers. We know a contractor in Florida was breached by these hackers that contracts with state entities around the country. We have not seen states come forward and acknowledge this attack. So it creates the problem. Are they forced to disclose by law? This is not necessarily an area of my specialty, but when you have personally identifiable information that is leaked, that has to be disclosed. However, there's a big exemption. If you are part of a national security investigation, the government can give you permission to bypass those rules and not disclose the breach for a certain amount of time. It's unclear if states have been given that exemption, but my guess is they probably would be. If states choose to talk about it, they can, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. So the problem there is, can you find out if your state was hacked? If your state's not going to tell anybody, it's really hard to know. Again, Illinois came forward and was very transparent about what happened there. And they were also transparent that while there were attempts to modify voter registration information in their database, that information appeared to be, those efforts appeared to be unsuccessful. It seems like pretty much a case-closed case in Illinois. For other states, we just have no idea. A lot's going to come out probably from reporting. Question here is, I voted with an absentee ballot. Were absentee ballots hacked? Again, our information about what was actually hacked is actually really limited. And part of the problem is that states can decide on their own whether they're going to disclose this information or not. And it depends on what type of information was stolen and whether they have certainty about what information was stolen. So unfortunately, I just don't have an answer for you about whether absentee ballots were hacked. We just don't know. The thing about absentee ballots is when you're mailing them in, just because that's a paper, it's a paper object in almost all the cases, but they are calculated via electronic tabulators in many places. So the problem with that becomes, the real question is, were the tabulation machines hacked? But we just have no idea. And again, DHS and the FBI would not release information about which specific systems were compromised in these states. We know about voter registration, we know about campaign finance, we just don't know further. And their answer yesterday was, well, the states know. That was unsatisfying to a lot of the senators, and I think to a lot of people, myself included, watching. I think for all of us who participate in this system, we would like more transparency. Next question here is, has this kind of hack, thank you for these questions, we're getting good ones. Has this kind of hack ever happened in another country's election? The answer is yes. The answer is absolutely. Unfortunately, what we've seen since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea in the Ukraine, and the U.S. imposed some pretty severe sanctions on Russia, we've seen a huge explosion in Russian hacking. Russian hackers, I should stress, every national security expert we talk to says that Russia's state-sponsored hacking is absolutely on par with the U.S. We are just neck and neck in terms of capabilities. So when you hear Russian hackers, you shouldn't think of the person in the basement. Donald Trump's famous quote about maybe it was some 400-pound guy in his mother's basement. That is not who the Russian state-sponsored hackers are. They are very, very skilled hackers, just like U.S. intelligence hackers. So this is starting to happen around the world. We saw overt actions in France's presidential election recently. We've seen activities against the German government and their electoral system there. And as viewers of this show may remember, we published a story last year involving an election hacker from Latin America, a Colombian election hacker, who did manipulation efforts around Latin America in more than a dozen countries. So this idea of tampering with an election digitally, the digital part is a relatively new phenomenon, but the idea is if you can manipulate information and you can manipulate how people consume really vital information about who they're going to vote for, what type of political positions do they stake out, that's just a form of information warfare that's taken on a new twist with the internet and email and things like that. So this, unfortunately, is happening all over the place. The Russians happen to be more overt about this now, but we also shouldn't be so naive to assume that the U.S. hasn't been involved in these activities as well. We have certainly tampered with our fair share of elections, especially in Latin America, over the decades. But the hacking element is new, is pretty new here. Next question here is, do we know the names of the hackers? Why haven't they been arrested? Well, we do know the unit that was alleged to be behind these attacks, and that's the GRU. That's Russia's military intelligence unit. So somewhat equivalent to the NSA, but not an exact match. Russia has two of these. There is the military intelligence unit, which is GRU, and there's the classic intelligence unit, the FSB, which is a successor to the KGB. It was the GRU, the military intelligence unit, that was accused by the U.S. of perpetrating these attacks. And we do know some of the names. In fact, of some of the alleged hackers, the U.S. has slapped sanctions on a number of Russians related to these election hacks. So those names are out there. The thing is that those individuals then will find it very difficult to travel outside of the country. Many of their assets may be frozen and things like that. So we do know the names of some individuals. The question is, how powerful is that naming and shaming element as a deterrent? Is it effective at all? Part of the issue that came up in our reporting earlier was that the United States warned Russia about this on no fewer than 2 occasions. In one case, they used what they call the red phone, which is a hotline between the White House and the Kremlin, where they can send secure messages, urgent messages saying, knock it off, or this is going to escalate further unless we do something. So that channel was used. Apparently to no effect or to little effect. And President Obama personally warned President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of an international conference to knock it off as well. The problem was, our information is that these attacks continued up to Election Day, and in fact, some are continuing to this day. So the question is, was it effective? Were the sanctions effective on some of the individuals believed involved? Some national security experts would argue that they weren't. Next question here is, could Georgia's Ossoff election have been hacked? This is referring to the congressional race that was decided this week in favor of the Republican candidate in Georgia to take position of a former congressman who has joined the Trump administration. Again, the Russian hacks on elections that we've been reporting on have focused mostly on 2016 and prior to the presidential election. We've got no indication that there was hacking involved in Georgia's election. I think what I would say on this topic is we should just assume that the Russians, and others as well, but especially Russia, considering the animosity that Putin and his circle feels toward the United States, considering the impact the sanctions over Ukraine have had, that they're going to be trying to do what they can and rattle all the doorknobs and infect as many databases as they can throughout our electoral system. But there's a big caveat here. The reason that 2016 was likely not effective in terms of the Russians actually tampering with votes is not because likely they didn't want to. It's likely because they were still trying to figure out how our system works. And that's the opinion of a number of national security experts who were either involved in these discussions or who have analyzed them from outside. So in regards to the question about could the Georgia race have been hacked, sure. I mean, there may be some manipulation of data that's possible, but I wouldn't leap to that conclusion. I think the bigger issue in some of these cases there are district boundary issues that we've created as a society, that we've allowed to be created, and as well as just strictly competitive issues. That the Georgia election occurred in a very strongly Republican community and area. So the Democratic challenger was a long shot to begin with. So I would not leap to hacking as a result of a Republican winning that race. That's just not the most likely conclusion. Next question here is, has Putin spoken publicly yet to confirm or deny the election hacks? Well, Putin, you have to remember, is a former intelligence officer for the KGB, a former Russian intelligence officer. So he plays some pretty smart, long games. He has spoken about these attacks publicly. He's called them a public service, that some of this information about the U.S. electoral system was leaked. He has said, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, in my estimation, perhaps some patriotic Russians did it without state support. And he has also said that Russia does not do state-sponsored hacking. Russia does not employ hackers. The Russian military and intelligence apparatus does not do any computer hacking. He's not exactly the most credible source on some of this information, but yes, he has spoken publicly about it. Again, he's called it a public service. He said many things about this. He has never waved the flag and said, yes, we did this. This was a great thing. But he's all but about said that. Next question here. If we were warned, what could we have realistically done to stop it? This is another, I think, really important question. Part of the reason for the Senate hearing, again, it was based partially or entirely on our reporting, which we're very proud of, is that the public is just not aware of how broad-based this Russian hacking effort was toward our election system. And I don't think the hearing yesterday really advanced our knowledge much further than what we already knew. So I'm hoping that some of our additional reporting, and ours and others, as well as additional congressional hearings, will help clarify that. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're warned, you can be a lot better prepared. As I've said before on this show, part of the problem with this type of hacking, with the voter registration systems, campaign finance, and all of these other systems are, while the state has some of that infrastructure, the most sensitive infrastructure exists at the county and local level. If you've ever interacted with a county agency, which most of us here in the U.S. have, you will know these county agencies are very poorly resourced in many cases. The fact that they have digital systems does not mean they have security people to monitor them. Illinois did. Illinois had a security person who came in twice a week, I believe, and spotted this data, this hacked data leaving the network. He got very, very lucky. The state got very, very lucky that they had an eagle-eyed person willing to spot that and able to spot that. Most counties don't even have a full-time IT person, let alone a security person. So to this question of if we're warned, what could we do about it? You could imagine a scenario in which if DHS and the FBI went out and said, hey, we've detected either compromises or targeted attacks on 39 states or more, the states can't then turn around and say, well, nobody told us. We would have hired somebody. We would have hired a security firm. We would have hired Mandiant or CrowdStrike or any of these forensics firms to come in and help secure our networks. Without any warning, relying on reporting for this stuff to get out, as important as we think it is, there is an obligation on behalf of the government to warn states that they're monitoring, hey, you guys are under attack. And that gives entities such as states, such as local municipalities, the opportunity to try to do better to defend their systems. Nobody's going to say the federal government is going to go in and help secure the thousands upon thousands of systems, computer systems that make up our electoral system. That's just not feasible. We don't want that as a country, in my opinion. You don't want the federal government messing with state affairs in that way. However, the federal government, DHS and FBI, the individuals here on the screen, do have a really important obligation to alert states to the extent that they can when their systems are under attack and what they can do. I should mention that DHS, prior to the 2016 election, did offer to go out to all states and do a hygiene scan to do any remediation on infected systems they find. But here's the rub, and that's great. That's what we expect them to do. The rub is, and the problem is that when attacks were detected, that is considered classified information on the federal level. For that information about, hey, we're on your network now, thank you for letting us in, and we've detected an attack. We've either blocked it or we've detected a compromise. That information is classified information at the federal level. It has to then be declassified and trickle down to the states, and that is a process that just takes a long time if it ever gets to the states. So the problem we have is the federal government is still holding a lot of really key information about what happened in 2016, and we're hoping that further reporting and congressional investigations will help us get to the bottom of it. So, as always, we really appreciate the questions. We get great questions on the show, and we really thank you for it. We hope we're helping illuminate some of these issues for you. We do it every week. We're on at noon Eastern almost every week. And we welcome any questions offline as well. You can tweet me. My Twitter is @JordanR1000, Jordan, the letter R1000. Bloomberg Technology is @technology. And please go visit our website, which is bloomberg.com/technology. We've got a great podcast there called Decrypted, as well as a show from my colleague Mark Gurman called Gadgets with Gurman. Thanks as always for watching. We'll see you next week, and we'll keep you up to date on any of these further developments.